Before we jump in, I need to once again credit the artwork for this video's thumbnail to Luke Headland. The poster I used for this video was one of the first of Luke's that I ever saw, and as soon as I came upon it, I thought, holy crap, that would be an amazing poster for the version of Saw 7 that I have in my head. And as I checked out more and more of his work, I knew I had to ask him if he'd be alright with me using his art for these videos. And I am extremely grateful that he did. I highly encourage you guys to use the links in the description to Luke's social media pages to check out more of his work. He has a lot of Saw-related content, as well as fan posters for other horror films. Once again, Luke, thank you for allowing these videos to benefit from the beauty of your work. Hello and welcome to my Saw 7 Rewrite. I've already released a couple of videos on this channel announcing and introducing this rewrite, so I'm not going to get into all of that again. But basically, today I am releasing the first of 7 episodic installments of my own Saw 7 script. And so yes, this video is to release to you guys part 1, and you can find the link to that document in the description of this video. Also linked in the description below is a character reference sheet that basically lists every somewhat major character from the first 6 Saw films. Basically, they're listed in alphabetical order from how they're referred to in the script. And yeah, basically that sheet, if you click on any of the names, it'll take you to the Saw Wiki page that will remind you who that character is if you don't know. So basically, if you see a name in the script and you think, okay, maybe I'm supposed to know who this is, you can open up that reference sheet, find the name alphabetically, click that, and be like, okay, that's who that is. That character reference sheet also lists which characters are new to the script. So basically, if you see a name and you're like, okay, am I supposed to know who that is? And you pull up that reference sheet and their name is under new characters, then you know that you aren't supposed to remember anything about them from previous movies. That character reference sheet will be included in each of these videos with each new installment. I was debating whether or not to turn the comments off for these installments until the last one to avoid spoilers, I guess. But I really would like feedback if anybody's willing to provide it. So I am going to leave the comments on for each video. I would just ask, like, don't talk about anything in the comment section to this video that occurs later on in the story. I would also ask that you don't look at the comments until after you've read the corresponding episode. The other purpose that these videos will serve is for me to kind of give a commentary of sorts on each part. So today I'm going to be talking about some things that happen in part 1. That said, I implore you to not continue on with this video until you have read part 1, which again is linked in the description. So yeah, if you're watching this, please do give that a read. And if you feel like it, come back here and listen to me ramble about some of my creative decisions. So originally I did not have the names Josh Stolberg and Peter Goldfinger on here because they're the ones that wrote the last 3 Saw films, Jigsaw, Spiral, and Saw X. And those are obviously outside of the original series and nothing I was dealing with, or as far as characters or plot elements, had anything to do with the stuff they wrote. The reason I ended up adding their names is because there is a part, it'll be in part 2, where John kind of talks about why he wanted his son to be born in the year of the pig. And I remember having an idea of why he wanted his kid born in the year of the pig prior to Jigsaw coming out. But I did not write it until after Jigsaw. And reading over it in the years since I wrote it, it's similar enough to what he says in Jigsaw. Yeah, I mean, it's almost impossible that didn't have some influence on the way that I wrote it. So yeah, I just felt like I should add their names too. So as I said in the introduction video for this Saw 7 script, the opening scene of Saw 3D, I think was kind of perfect. I think starting the conclusion of this series with a scene that immediately resolves a mystery that has been around since the first movie, that being whether or not Lawrence survived. I think that was a very excellent way to start the film, and it was a very promising start. Unfortunately, I don't feel like the rest of the movie lived up to that promise. That's the one scene that I kept exactly as it was. And it's a good example of why I originally wanted to release this in a video format of sorts. Basically, if I had presented it that way, you would have just seen the opening couple minutes of Saw the Final Chapter, and then it would have transitioned into a type of motion script where the text would appear on the screen, and I would have put some of Charlie Clouser's music over the text you're reading. I did create a version of that for the opening of this movie, you know, what I had imagined the entirety of this project being. Basically, I created a version of the opening couple of scenes where it goes from Lawrence cauterizing his stump into the first trap scene, and that has the music playing over it. And yeah, basically after I created that and I watched it a few times, it took me forever to try and get the music and the timing and the amount of time to leave the text on the screen. It took me forever in editing to kind of get that where I was somewhat happy with it. And then after watching it a couple of times, I still wasn't convinced that there was a perfect amount of time to do that sort of thing. So yeah, I ultimately ended up abandoning that. The traps in this script were by far the hardest thing for me to write, largely because that is the aspect of this story specifically that I was the least interested in. To me, there was just so much story left to tell regarding the ongoing characters. And so when there's still so much left to do in the conclusion to this story, I didn't feel like there was really enough time to add in another significant ongoing trap or ongoing game. So that said, some of these traps, when I first wrote them, all of these, with the exception of one, was written before Spiral came out. And a couple of them I was actually kind of proud of, just because it was so difficult for me to think of something that hadn't already been done. This one was probably the one I was the most proud of. I think it's terrifying, the idea of being buried alive. Also, yeah, there's just so much about it that I think, to me at least, is quite scary. But I also was like, okay, what hasn't been done? You know, we've had people like having to cut out their eye. We've had people, I mean, they've done everything with every body part pretty much. And when I thought of the tongue, I was proud of that, because like, yeah, I was, oh, they haven't done anything with the tongue yet. And then, you know, when I was originally supposed to be sharing this with everybody, it was supposed to be around the time that Spiral was released. I didn't get it out before that came out, and then when I went and saw Spiral, and I saw that movie opened with a tongue-related trap, that was another thing that kind of made me lose enthusiasm and fall off of this project for a while. Because, yeah, I was like, well, now everybody's going to think that I just took that from Spiral, even though the traps are quite different. There is another trap later on. I won't spoil it, but basically, the only part of this that I've shared with anybody, I shared a couple of the traps with one of my friends and with my brother. And again, this was before Spiral came out. I sent them this one, and I sent them two others. And one of the ones I sent them, there is a trap that is extremely similar that was in Saw X, which obviously just came out. And there's actually a quick shot of that trap in the trailer for Saw X. And when I saw it in the trailer, I was like, fuck. Like, now they're going to think that I ripped that from Saw X. And I swear I did not. There are two people in the world that know that I wrote mine years ago. And yeah, anyways, we'll talk about that more when we get to that trap. But the point is, I really liked this game. I'm a bit upset that Spiral beat me to the punch. But that moment of, you know, the idea of you cut out your own tongue because you're desperately trying to escape the situation, and then finding out that it was for nothing, and then you still get buried alive. Like a lot of people, I am not, like, for me, the appeal of the traps in the games is the idea that people can make it out. I am very much on the side that the best games are the ones that give people a chance. But yeah, something about that, there is a type of horror that comes with thinking that you have a chance and doing this horrific thing, and then finding out it was for nothing. And in my script, there are multiple traps where it kind of explores the horror of that. Explore might be a generous word, but it I guess confronts the horror of that. So again, as I said in my introduction video, I felt like a big part of what Saw 7 should have been was a deeper look at John's philosophy and his relationship with his apprentices or his accomplices, and what the dynamics were like between him and each of them, as well as with each other. And I think that definitely applied to Amanda at least as much as anybody else. And, after the reveal in Saw 6 that she was largely responsible for Gideon's death. And not only that, just that John and Jill, specifically Jill, knew Amanda prior to Jigsaw even being a thing. I think those reveals in 6, I wouldn't say that they raise questions exactly, but it certainly, it potentially adds an interesting degree of context to John and Amanda's relationship before and after she becomes his apprentice. And so I wanted to show her in group therapy, kind of show her briefly before, when she's still struggling with addiction. And I thought a good way to do that was to have her share her story for how she became an addict, which, as we already knew, was largely because of Eric framing her. And there were a lot of things in Saw 2 that always made me... It was always fun to imagine what exactly happened between Eric and Amanda, because she says she never did drugs before she went to prison because he framed her. So the question of how did they end up encountering each other and why did he decide to frame her? That was always an interesting thing to think about. And I do think that there are hints towards that in Saw 2, specifically the line that John says about breaking a jaw with a flashlight. The fact that it was a jaw and Amanda's trap was jaw related. Yeah, I just always felt like that was referencing what happened to Amanda specifically. Also, the message at the beginning of Saw 2, where it says, "Look closer, Detective Matthews," and then later he makes the connection to Wilson Steele because he had seen the Wilson Steele logo on Michael's Venus flytrap. As a kid, I remember kind of laughing at that part because it almost seemed like they were saying that nobody else noticed that it said Wilson Steele, and that only Eric Matthews could have figured that out. But as I grew up and, became more logical and analytical, I think that what actually was happening there was Wilson Steele meant something to Eric specifically, like he had some kind of history there, and that he would see that and make the connection that, okay, he's referencing something from my past as a police officer. And to Michael specifically. I think Carrie and whoever else was investigating almost certainly saw the Wilson Steele logo, and eventually in their investigation may have checked out that factory. But I think immediately they just took that as, okay, yeah, that's where he got the metal from. Whereas Eric, again, is the only one that could put the pieces together of Michael, his CI, and Wilson Steele, and have that memory come back to him and realize that that's not a coincidence that he was put in a Wilson Steele device. As for Hoffman being not only present in this scene, but kind of a huge influence on why Eric makes the choice that he makes. Again, in my introduction video, I talked about the allegory that is the Saul story, as I see it. And I definitely feel like Hoffman is meant to represent the devil archetype. And so I really liked the idea of Hoffman being present at this absolutely critical moment of Amanda's life and Eric's life, and being the one to sort of tempt and corrupt Eric into this decision, while also not actually making the decision for Eric. It is still Eric's choice to do what he does to Amanda, but Hoffman is the one that initially tempts him and presents him with that choice. So a popular ambiguous question that remains in the Saw fandom is whether or not John knew that Amanda was involved in Gideon's death. I believe that he must have known, because the only way for Hoffman to know about it outside of John telling him, in which case obviously John had to have known, is for him to have read about it in a police report. And in order for it to be in a police report, that means that the police had to have known about it. And for the police to have known about it, but to have not informed John and Jill, that seems unlikely to me. So yeah, basically, to me, the inevitable conclusion is that John did know. One of the things I forgot to mention in my introduction video when I was talking about things that I liked in concept about what Saw the Final Chapter tried to do, but didn't really execute well, in my opinion. Yeah, one of the things I forgot to mention was Hoffman's disfigurement and that kind of sneering scar that he's left with after the end of Saw 6. I liked that idea, and I do like the execution of it to a degree. I just don't feel like they went far enough with it. I feel like his disfigurement should have been more severe. Like I said, it actually looks kind of minimal compared to, like, the damage looks kind of minimal compared to what he looks like at the very end of Saw 6. And to me, the fact that he uses the trap to smash and break his hand, and that device, like, it's got a metal piece going between his teeth, like, that should have destroyed his teeth. Like, they should be broken and knocked out, and yeah, just kind of horrible to look at. And yeah, so I feel like, yes, he should have had the sneering scar, but yeah, I also think that his teeth, they should have been horribly damaged, and this would contribute to this kind of monstrous form that he has become. And basically, yeah, now he kind of looks as monstrous as he is. So Fisk, yeah, for those of you that maybe aren't as obsessive about the Saw series, Fisk was featured in Saw 4 and Saw 5 as another detective that worked with Hoffman. Saw 5 establishes that he too has been around since the beginning of the Jigsaw investigation. And Saw 3D introduces these other goofy detectives. I mean, one of them specifically is goofy, but I always felt that Fisk would have been the better option, just because he'd already been established. That said, I'm not necessarily like criticizing the storytellers about that, because who knows, maybe that actor wasn't available. Maybe, I mean, there's all kinds of behind the scenes reasons that maybe that just wasn't an option. But yeah, as far as, you know, just being able to tell the story, you know, whatever version of the story I wanted to tell, and not having to worry about casting and things like that, I just felt it was appropriate. You know, Fisk is, now that Hoffman's been outed to a degree, Fisk really is the last man standing as far as the detectives that have been working on the Jigsaw case. And so for the conclusion, it felt like he was the one that should be trying to figure out what the heck's going on. And with him, I wanted to start off showing that he's not an idiot. And I wanted to show him at the scene of Perez and Erickson's murder, and, you know, have him kind of be like, well, this doesn't really make sense. Like, why would Strom show up and kill them? Like, the only motive for Strom showing up and killing them was to destroy the evidence against him. But then why would he leave his fingerprints all over the place? One of my biggest criticisms of Saw the Final Chapter was Lawrence Gordon barely being in it, and the reveal that he was involved, or an accomplice to some degree, to Jigsaw, having that be saved for the very end, when a lot of fans had already figured that out, years in advance, that was very unsatisfying for me. And so, yeah, I think that the way that should have played out, and the way that it does play out in my version, is that you get that reveal pretty quickly. Like, pretty much right away, you have Hoffman show up to Lawrence, and it's quickly established that Lawrence has been involved with John and the other Jigsaw apprentices for a while. And while I do find it believable that Hoffman wouldn't necessarily know every detail of, John having access to certain things, or whether or not he had certain people helping him in other areas. I don't think Hoffman had to be 100% familiar with John's operation, but Lawrence, in the role that he would have played, as far as the degree of involvement that Lawrence had to have had, the idea that Hoffman would never have been aware, it's not believable to me. So, yeah, I simultaneously wanted to establish that not only has Lawrence been an accomplice, but him and Hoffman have been perfectly well aware of each other. In Hoffman's case, I really wanted to establish a bit more of his backstory and why he is so cynical. Obviously, Saw 5 does a good job of establishing that, his sister was murdered by this guy, and the guy more or less got away with it. And I think it's kind of understandable where Hoffman's anger is coming from there. But, kind of what he goes on to become, the horrible, horrific ways that he goes on to kill people. I mean, even just Erickson and Perez at the end of Saw 6, like when he sees that Erickson's still alive when he's pouring the gasoline on him, and he smirks about it. For someone to be that callous, I feel like his complete lack of respect for human life, or him, not seeming to value it really much at all, I felt like it was worth establishing why that might be. And when I was trying to kind of imagine what his childhood might have been like, where my mind started, like the pieces that I had to begin with, were, what John says about his sister being his only family. That had me wondering why that would be. Also, the fact that his sister didn't share his last name. She, in the newspaper articles in Saw 5, she's referred to as Angelina Acombe. Don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but that's obviously not Hoffman's last name, which is Hoffman, and it's not Seth's last name. And I won't pretend to know why the people that made Saw 5 made that decision to not have her have his last name. But, for me, trying to tell my own story, and trying to come up with, Hoffman's backstory, that was something worth considering. Why might they have different last names, and how might that suggest what Hoffman's childhood looked like? And so, yeah, from there I kind of, in my head, crafted, Hoffman's tragic childhood, which, it's not hard to imagine why somebody who grew up in those circumstances would have such a cynical view of human beings. The one person outside of his mother who it could be argued failed him by not protecting him from the abuse he suffered, and then abandoning him in a way. So outside of her, the only truly good person that Hoffman ever had in his life was his sister, and then she was taken from him in this brutal way by another awful human being. And yeah, it doesn't become hard to imagine why Hoffman views people in general as bad and irredeemable. One of my big issues with Saw 5, something that I viewed as a plot hole, and I think probably was a plot hole. It was just something that maybe wasn't thought about at the time. But, Saw 5 opens with Seth Baxter's game, and initially we as the audience don't know when that's taking place. But as the movie progresses, we learn that it was very early on in the timeline of Jigsaw being active. In fact, in that same movie, we see Strom going through the FBI folders of the victims, and we see that Seth Baxter is listed towards the very beginning. And while it's undeniable that that list is not in perfect chronological order, which we know because, like, for example, Jeff Rittenhauer, who was in the drill chair, he's listed after Lawrence Gordon, Adam, and Zepp on the list, and we know that that happened 5 months. We know that Jeff's situation was 5 months before the bathroom game. So, yeah, that list is not in perfect chronological order. So one could argue that Seth's game was further down that list than it's listed, because it's listed as the second name after Cecil. But the reason that it kind of has to be the second one out of that list is because we know that Hoffman was helping with Paul's trap. We know that the pin light was found at Mark's trap, which we know John gave Hoffman the pin light at Paul's game. So that means that Mark's game had to have come after Paul's. And even in the scenario where Mark's game somehow came first, like in between Cecil and Seth's, which again I don't think is possible, because it's very clear that the pin light in Saw 1, it's found at Mark's crime scene. Carrie presents it at Mark's crime scene. But even in that scenario, the Billy puppet isn't used for Mark's tape. So basically, Seth Baxter's game had to have occurred after Cecil's, and then the only other game that anyone would argue happened prior to that would be Mark's, which also didn't have the Billy puppet. So the question becomes, if Hoffman was trying to make this look like a Jigsaw game, why did he make a videotape with this Billy puppet? If Cecil was the only other victim, it raises the question of how Hoffman knew to do that. And since we don't see a tape for Cecil, how did Hoffman know what the MO of Jigsaw was? The type of message to deliver to someone like Seth. And yeah, I actually think that there's a fairly reasonable explanation for that. You actually see in Saw 4 that John was recording a tape for Cecil. We know he doesn't end up using that tape because he just delivers the message in person. But Saw 4 does establish that a tape was made, that he was altering audio for a Cecil tape. And considering why Cecil was chosen as John's first subject, that being largely because of him killing Gideon, I do think it makes sense that the tape that he was making would have been a videotape with Billy the puppet, the life-size version that he would then have made for the first time. And the fact that Cecil is listed as a known victim, the fact that in Saw 4 Jill shows a newspaper article that has something to do with Cecil after he's died. We don't get to see what the headline says. We don't see what the story is, but it's clear that Cecil was found, because they wouldn't have been. It's unlikely they would have been reporting in the newspaper that some random drifter dude went missing. All of this tells us that Cecil was likely found. The puzzle piece was likely cut out, and I like to think that John left the videotape that he made for Cecil with the body. And I think that he would have done that because, as we know about Jigsaw, he wants his message to reach people. And so, yeah, I do think that he left Cecil along with other evidence to kind of announce that he has started this work. And I think that would immediately present Hoffman with this opportunity to copy that MO. And I think that concludes it for part 1. Yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping that you guys found that an interesting start. Like I said, that's just the beginning. Yeah, feel free to let me know how you guys felt about this. Any criticisms, questions, any feedback at all. I don't want to discourage people from like theorizing or guessing where things are going. I guess I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little concerned that people might guess things right and that might spoil it for other people. But maybe that's part of the fun. You know, I know when I watch stuff and I'm watching it week to week or whatever, you know, part of the fun is trying to theorize about where things are headed and whatnot. So yeah, I guess I leave it to you guys. Again, I would just ask that if you're watching this in the future and you've read ahead, please don't comment about things that happen beyond part 1. And depending on the amount of feedback I get, I may, after this is all done, I may come back with another video where I address your guys' feedback directly. So yeah, again, if you guys have any questions or anything, feel free to leave those below. And, you know, some of them might be answered as the story progresses. And if not, then yeah, maybe I'll come back and talk about it. But I hope you guys will come back for the next one.
Hello there. If you'd like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive, just click the circle to subscribe. In the meantime, you can click either of the 2 boxes to check out other content from this channel. Or don't. The choice is yours.